Awesome. So I'm a little trepidatious, as you can imagine, since we're going to give you a live demonstration of MLab. This means that everyone that is following us online can actually go to our system and start playing around with the data visualization as we are unveiling it right now. I want to welcome you all to the New America Foundation. My name is Sasha Meinrath. I am both a co-founder of the Measurement Lab project and also director of the Open Technology Initiative here at New America. And the Open Technology Initiative is sort of the tech telecom arm of New America's work. Now, 2 years ago, for those of us that have been longtime fans of Measurement Lab, Vint and I publicly launched Measurement Lab here at New America, actually at our old space. In my prior work, I was working for a group called CADA, the Cooperative Association for Internet Data Analysis. And I feel like that kind of primed me, or got me really excited and interested in what I can only describe as a super geeky area of telecom policy, this broadband metrics and data collection. And in our own modest way, I wanted Open Technology Initiative, when we began, to really sort of help alleviate what Casey Claffey, the head of CADA, called the data acquisition crisis facing policymaking here in D.C. And that's one of the reasons why we created Measurement Lab and got involved in that. And now Measurement Lab is remarkably different than any other endeavor I know about. 2 years ago, we contemplated building sort of this data collection platform that would sort of support this scientific and research community to do their work. And we wanted something that could scale up research experiments from sort of the collecting of hundreds, perhaps thousands of data points to something that could collect, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of data points. And we wanted to do this using an open process, as open and radically transparent as possible. In essence, we wanted to have peer review. We wanted to have open source tools on this platform. We wanted it to be an open process whereby new partners could get involved, new researchers could get involved, new tools could be deployed on this infrastructure. And we wanted it to be all about open data and maximum transparency. So every piece of data that Measurement Lab collects, we make publicly available. This, of course, means that there's certain data that we don't want to collect, so-called personal identifying information. But it does also mean that everything that we collect then ends up in the public domain, and that's very important for us. This is part of this support for science, for research, for informed decision-making. Now, little did we know when we created this Measurement Lab platform that broadband data metrics would become sexy. And all of a sudden, we started realizing that a lot of the work that had been done sort of in sort of the bowels, I'll say, of OECD would all of a sudden start garnering a lot of attention, a lot of debate amongst policymakers. And that right soon after, we would end up with this national broadband mapping effort, which was, this is unprecedented in the United States. And really, I think, epitomizes this move towards, empirically backed telecom decision-making. So all of a sudden, government agencies were scouring the country for some of the smartest minds in our field and wanting to launch these truly, what I believe, visionary efforts. And NTIA and FCC, who today are personified by Ann Neville and Michael Byrne, who will be up here in a moment, they began talking about testing hypotheses and rigorous data collection methodologies and peer review and data transparency, things that, those of us that have been in the research and scientific community were used to, but seemed very awkward at first in sort of DC circles. And they started sounding a lot like, in fact, these scientists and researchers that we've been working with. And all of a sudden, there were these multiple efforts taking place over the last few years to do really profoundly interesting data collection. And the amounts of broadband data started growing. And the questions on all our minds really became, so how do we leverage the resources that each project brings to bear? How do we use the strengths of each of these different initiatives to figure out what is actually going on online? Now, for Measurement Lab, the choices were very easy. When the FCC put out a public call for ideas to collect consumer broadband data, we responded And today, if you go to the broadband.gov, the Consumer Broadband Test, one of the key tools that's used there is, in fact, Measurement Lab. We're part of that effort. And when NTIA was looking for ideas and feedback on their efforts, we, of course, made ourselves available. And we provided, in fact, some first peeks of the new technologies that we would be going public with months later. And so Ann and company got a chance to see what I'll call sort of the pre-alpha version of some of the work that we're unveiling today. And when OECD contacted us and said, hey, do you have any data available? We offered enough to fill every hard drive in the building. And I think that's really important, is that we were scouring the earth looking for co-conspirators in science and technology. And because of these collaborations...
I wish you wouldn't use that word in Washington. Pick something else. I'm sorry.
Colleagues. And because of these collaborations, because of the tremendous support for these initiatives, and we're talking about from the agencies that are represented today to Internet2, Amazon, OJC Tech, AARNet, EETT, SamKnows, Quova, Planet Lab, BitTorrent, and of course Google. Because of all of this, and because of all of these people that were working behind the scenes for the past 2 years, and if we're the public face, let me just say that the real work is being done by a huge number of different individuals. My colleague at Google, my doppelganger, can I use that? Derek Slater has done tremendous work, and Tiziana and Meredith, who are here today in the audience, they have done just huge amounts of work behind the scenes. My team here at New America, and then this huge group of researchers that have developed these tools and placed them on Measurement Lab and brought on board PhD students. This is a real international collaborative effort in support of research and in support of science. Now, from modest beginnings, I thought this was a visionary notion of tens, hundreds of thousands of data points. MLab has grown to become quite an extensive data broadband collection platform and is larger than any other of its kind on the planet today. So today, we're not collecting tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of data points. We're collecting somewhere around 1.3 million data points, data tests every day. That's a huge data set, right? So today we're talking about 300 terabytes of data. Anyone in the audience have the capacity except for Vint, for 300 terabytes of data? I mean, this is a huge data set, which brings me, in essence, to the crux of today's problem, if you will, which is that now that we've collected all these data, how do we make sense of them? So not only did we have to build a data collection platform, we needed a data aggregation system, we needed a storage solution, we needed an analysis program, and then we needed also a data visualization application. All of this had to be part of the Measurement Lab project. Now, when you're building a global broadband measurement system, and you're talking about technologies that actually don't exist anywhere on Earth, and you're talking about a scale far larger than anyone has ever envisioned, you need a Vint Cerf. And as Google's chief internet evangelist, Vint has helped rally the troops. He's helped resource the initiative. And he's also been at the forefront of helping introduce Measurement Lab to the public and working to show how this research scientific endeavor is actually incredibly useful for key decision makers and for the general public at large. So without further ado, and the reason probably why most of you are here, I'm going to turn this over to Vint Cerf, who can walk us through some of what I find some of the most profoundly interesting results of the Measurement Lab platform to date.
Thank you, Sasha. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate that the New America Foundation just demonstrated its ability to respond on the fly to a demand, and here we are. First of all, I appreciate very much the opportunity to engage again on this topic. I don't want to take as much credit as you offered to me. I'm sort of the executive cheerleader, but there are people who do the real work. Some of them are in the room. You mentioned Derek already. Stephen Stewart out at the Mountain View facility has been a major player in creating the Measurement Lab structure. Tiziana Refice is behind me here, and she's pay no attention to the person behind the podium. She's the one who has been deeply involved in implementing a lot of the technology that you'll be seeing momentarily. Meredith Whitaker is back there waving her hand. She's sort of project managed this whole thing, at least from the Google point of view, and there are many others that deserve credit. So what I'd like to do first, Tiziana, if it's possible, is to get a diagram of the system up. Is that possible to do that? Can you? Or just, if we don't have it, it's okay. This is all happening on the fly. Don't worry about it. Just stay there where you are. This system has a number of pieces, and the ones that you need to understand are that there are clients, people with laptops and desktops, who are using the Internet. When they run the software to run a test, they are interacting with the MLab servers that are scattered around the network. There aren't as many of them as we would like. There are dozens of them, but we would like hundreds or thousands of them so that they are more uniformly distributed around the Internet. So I will come back to that topic and try to encourage more servers to happen as this project continues. The data that is generated by the testing is delivered to a large storage system and processed, and then placed into two major systems that Google operates. One is called Bigtable and one is called BigQuery. These are publicly available open API systems, so that it's possible to then run software that takes the data out and displays it. So you're seeing an example of the kind of display that's possible. I want to emphasize several things. First of all, this is not Google's data. This is publicly available data generated by the people who have run the various tests. We're simply hosting that information and making it accessible to analytical software that presents these results. The second thing is that there is a lot of data, and it is not a trivial thing to understand the meaning of that data. The purpose for making it publicly accessible to the researchers is that we need them to work their way through the data, to analyze it and interpret it. So one of the most important things about any enterprise of this kind is not just collecting the data and not just presenting it, but understanding what it means. So part of our motivation here in the United States has been to try to understand what broadband experiences quantitatively we are seeing as users of the Internet distributed across the United States. But we're also very interested in understanding how broadband is working in other parts of the world as well. There are lots of assertions about where people are ranked and which countries are ranked where, but those are often not very quantitative, and so we're very interested in making those more crisp and understandable by getting solid data behind everything. So let me start out with what you're seeing here is kind of a global view using the Google Earth presentation technology. So I want to fix this so you can see what you're doing here too. Oh, you can see what you're doing because it's on your display. Okay. So what we're seeing here are two different kinds of information presented simultaneously. The colors over here are the download throughput, median throughput that has been measured in the places where we see. So where it's blue, the data rates have been low, and where it's red, the data rates are higher. The U.S. is sort of in the middle, as you can see over on the left. The size of the circle in this particular case is also indicative of the throughput that's being experienced. But we have flexibility to change the presentation literally on the fly. So if we could change the size of the circle to represent the number of data points that have been collected, now you see that they've changed their appearance because the smaller circles mean there was less data available to do the computation. The larger circles say there was more. And you'll see that in North America, the circle didn't get any smaller. That means we've collected a substantial amount of information. The point about this is that the more data you collect, the more statistically valid it can be. So that's just one example. Can we now go to the United States and let's have a look at the results just from the U.S. And here we can see, where are we? We're floating in space. We're now at 22,400 feet. Okay, so here what we're seeing again is the same throughput indicators in color and the number of clients indicated by circle size. So you see California and Texas are particularly large samples, probably because there are a lot of geeks in both of those places. If we go to Texas for a minute, we can actually zoom in on Texas and see city by city what the data tells us. So let's go there. Now, I want to emphasize that somebody who is trying to understand this data can do quite a bit of transformation of its presentation just by pointing and clicking. This is an incredibly rich system. It's very complicated down inside. We tried to make it easy on the surface for people to change things. Now let's have a look at where do we want to go? We want to go to Austin, Texas, which is where the University of Texas is located. Let's have a look at what this looks like. And now we also have time-based information because these data were collected over time. So we can cause the chart display to be presented to us over time. And here what you're seeing, this is the number of unique clients, which probably what we're seeing, I would interpret this as a big novelty factor where lots of people tried things out when it first became available. And then you get a more steady state appearance from that. Could we also, yes, let's look at throughput. Here what we're seeing, again, is over time. We can animate this if we want to. Let's go. Here we go. Let's look at this. There we go. Okay, now let's see what happens over time. Throughput is in colors, and here we go. We can see. So Austin, here you see different cities. So we can, the different colors tell us which cities have had high bandwidth, which ones have had lower bandwidth on the average. Who's up in the far left? Garland, Texas. And Dallas is down there at the bottom. Well, that tells you something. You know, one thing that I would almost hope is that the researchers who will use these tools to explain the information will make their conclusions more visible to the public. This could stimulate a certain amount of interest, for example, in Dallas to say, how come we don't have the same kind of capacity that Garland, Texas has? Okay, so I don't mean to stir up trouble in Texas, but it is, you know, there's a man named Richard Hamming who was well known for his data gathering habits. But he said repeatedly, the purpose of data gathering is not numbers, it's insight. And that's what we're looking for here. If we could go now, I want to look at the congestion chart. If we can bring that one up. Okay, this is not easy to explain, but let me remind you. I want a picture in your head. You have a client, you have the network, and you have a server. Those are the three logical pieces that are part of these tests. And you can imagine that if there is congestion, it could be at any one of those three places. The server might not have adequate capacity on the net to serve all of the demands that are placed on it that are being measured. The network may be the bottleneck, or the connection of the client to the network may be the bottleneck. So there are all those three possibilities. In this design, the servers, at least the ones that we put up, have extremely high data rate access to the networks, well beyond the core of the network speeds. So we don't think that's the bottleneck. The real bottlenecks are either the network service or the access speed at the client. So we've plotted the ratio of the time that we gathered in the measurement where the throughput was limited by the network, by its capacity, against the time that we collected where the client was the bottleneck. So we have a ratio of those two. What this means is that down towards the right, if you see Garland, Texas is way down there, their limitations were on the receiver side. So if there was any data rate limitation, it's because of the connection that the client had, not the network. On the other hand, when you go up to the other side, way up at the top there, Corpus Christi, Houston, and the like, if there were limitations, it would appear that it's the network that had insufficient capacity. Now, we can watch this over time. I know this looks like kind of an animated ping pong game. What I've found, you stare at this for a while and you keep running the thing over and over again until you start to see patterns of what happens. Can we play that one more time? So the point I want to make here is that the tool, what I want to highlight is that this tool is amazingly flexible about its ability to present to you different views of those 300 terabytes worth of data. And it will be the researchers trying out these different tactics that will help us get insight into what we're actually seeing in the American broadband network landscape. Let's see, could we go back to the United States now again and see what the U.S. looks like as a whole with regard to download speeds? I don't know about you, but this is the sort of thing where you could play for hours trying things out and seeing what they look like and then trying to figure out what does it all mean. So here's the U.S. Can we look at download speeds for all of the United States? So this is a median picture across the United States. And can we see this over, we can see over time here that it has not changed very much. I mean, it's gone from 5 to 6 down to 4.79. It's not clear why we would see the median speeds going down unless there's some possible network congestion. What could be happening here, since we're seeing this over time, is that over this period from January to 2010 to February 2011, there is more and more demand being placed on the net. I am not telling you that that's what the data says. I don't mean to say that. I am saying that this is an example of speculation that you would want to go and investigate. All of you have noticed the increase in the interest in pushing video through the internet. The Netflix decision to do as much as possible real-time streaming as opposed to sending DVDs through the mail is an example of an increased appetite for high bandwidth in both directions, uploading and downloading. So I'm not saying that's what causes this particular profile, but it's an example of the sort of hypothesis that you might make and then want to see if the data proves that or not. Let's see. We've got... you want to go to, yes, bar charts. That's a good idea. So here we're seeing all the countries whose data we've collected. And if we could see, let's watch the U.S. over time. These, again, are the median throughputs measured over these time periods. So we're clearly not at the top of the list. The countries on the far right are in blue, and they are relatively low bandwidth on average. Now let's do one more thing, because I know that I should be finishing here quickly. Could we go to Europe for just a minute? And let's plot the download speeds that people are getting versus the round-trip times that they're experiencing. What's the throughput latency that characterizes the European environment?
Actually, it is worldwide.
So, I'm sorry?
It is actually worldwide. It includes all the countries. We're not selecting only European countries in this visual.
No, this is all countries. Okay. So it's not just European countries. That's fine. So what we're plotting right now is we've got download throughput. We want to change. Oh, and you've got round trip time. Okay, so that's good. Could we get sample size instead of download for the? Okay, so now we're seeing the how much data we have collected. The size of the circle is how much data we've collected, and we're seeing round trip times on the right on the horizontal chart and throughput. So somebody who has a high throughput, like the Netherlands, and a low round trip time, is getting very good service because you're getting high bandwidth and not too much delay. On the other hand, if you're off in Kazakhstan, you're getting lower throughput and higher round trip times. Now, I don't know if you're able to show the chart where the servers actually are. Can we try to pull that up? The point I want to make here, I'm stressing my helper here, but the thing I want to point out is that the round trip time data is very much dependent on where the servers happen to be and where the clients are. So distance in network sense has some influence on the measurement of the round trip time, and that's a distortion of the real network performance depending on where the servers happen to be. So one of the things I want to illustrate here, this is an eye chart for people who are in the back, I'm afraid, but if we can blow that up a little bit.
You know, I can do this, but I fear it's going to start from the beginning. Yeah. Let's do this. I'm sorry.
This is what we would have done if we hadn't had a live demo, so thank you very much to New America for that. There we go. Okay, so what you're seeing here is we have a not too unreasonable spread of servers in the United States, because in network terms, the round trip time across the United States is about 60 milliseconds at the speed of light. On the other hand, you can see in the lower right, or if you can't see in the lower right, let me say that the servers that are part of the system right now are heavily implemented on the Western European side, and not so much in the south and to the east. And so the data collected from the countries off in Eastern Europe will be distorted. The round trip times will be distorted by the fact that the servers are farther away. So the pitch that I'd like to make on behalf of the researchers who are trying to deliver insight is to get more servers up. And Google can provide some, but not all. So the point I want to make here is we have an opportunity to imbue this apparatus with a lot more value if we make some investments in servers in places where they are not today. So let me finish by observing that the tools that Google is making available and that are usable here can be applied to other data from other sources than MLab. And if we can arrange for or encourage other companies to inject their data into this system so that it can be analyzed and presented, we'll get a much better picture of what's actually happening in the internet around the world. You have that? Oh, there we. Oh, this was the one that we were going to show at the beginning that we didn't show. Well, we don't have time. It's okay. Except I will say. Let me just say that the two things that I want to emphasize here are the BigQuery, the big blue box down there, and the Google Storage, which are the two places where you can inject data into the system and then use our analytical tool to present that data in the various ways that I've illustrated today. So let me stop there and thank you very much for your time and ask our moderator to come up and continue the program. And thank you very much for Tiziana for helping us out, and also Meredith. So you're next.
Well, so as you can see, we've been busy. I want to invite actually all of you can come on up and grab a seat here.
Is this called panel servitude?
Yes. That was by far the smoothest, once we got it all set up, the smoothest live presentation I think I've seen perhaps ever. Can we also turn off the overhead projector here, if at all possible? Exactly. But I do want to give a shout out both to Vint, but also to our other panelists. What you have up here is sort of the broadband metrics data measurement A-team. When I look here and I see who we've brought here together, they are the leadership of some of the most innovative projects, period, looking at these sorts of issues. And so I want to give everyone a chance to maybe give a couple of thoughts or responses to what you've seen here today. This is the first time that they're seeing this as well. So you can imagine this is, I heard some murmurs of wow while we were watching this. So we have on my far right Michael Byrne, who's been leading a lot of the GIS work at the Federal Communications Commission and really pulling together all of that fantastic visualization work on the National Broadband Map, and followed by Taylor Reynolds. He's I think it's a special analyst or something, it's a really sexy name. But what it means is that he's helping coordinate a lot of the OECD's broadband data work. And if you've been following this space, you know that OECD's data on broadband metrics are probably some of the most cited period on Earth in terms of international comparative analyses, how different countries are doing vis-a-vis one another. And right next to Vint, we have Anne Neville, who has been leading for the last 2 years NTIA's broadband data mapping efforts and has kept everything together in a remarkably fast time frame using an insane, like if you think our data is crazy, like try 50 different methodologies or 56 different methodologies from all the states and trying to tie that together and make it coherent. So I want to give you each a chance to respond to what you've seen here today. Maybe, well, Michael, we could start with you and just go down the line.
So I think, you know, I was probably one of those ones that whispered, wow. Great job. This is just fantastic. As a geographer, I think you've done a spectacular job. You've integrated just a tremendous amount of data in a fashion that makes it consumable and easy and provides, as you said, Vint, so eloquently, context. The whole notion of seeing how this relates to something else in a broader context, being able to dive into a record level and see where that plays, how it ranks, how it fits in time. I would echo how important it is to have a platform on which to stand all of these things. The fact that you're using BigQuery and Bigtable as the launching pad for everything else with open applications, so that the individual researcher can dive into those really pertinent questions with that tremendous data set, and at the same time perhaps allow new economies of scales, new markets to open based on those open APIs, so that individual companies can come in and do the same thing. We attempted to follow that similar path in the development of the foundation of the National Broadband Map through these open applications and that platform that allowed new economies of scale to happen. I think in just summing, Tufti would be proud, right? You know, this whole notion of multivariate analysis, seeing as many as 6 different variables in a single landscape, time, space, context, X, Y, the whole bit. Just great job. You know, I'll make sure that my comments are brief, but fantastic work.
Yes, Taylor.
Fantastic. My name is Taylor Reynolds. My title is actually economist, which I still think is pretty sexy. But my wife probably doesn't. I just wanted to point out, this is an incredible tool for economists, because one of the things that we have put forward is the importance of broadband infrastructure. And we've noticed that policymakers are now taking heed and saying, yes, broadband is an infrastructure that is a key component of our economies, much the same way the electricity grid, the road networks, water, that broadband is something that we need to promote. The problem we've had in the past is that the data that we collect at the OECD has been fairly high level. So I tried to think of a way to explain this, and I think it would be like saying exercise is good for you. You know, we can say exercise is good for you, but that's about the level of detail we can give you right now with the statistics that the OECD has. We can say that countries that have broadband, it's fairly well known now that they have higher economic growth, and we're working on studies to prove this right now, but it's very high level. What I think this type of data analysis allows us now is to say not only is exercise good for you, We get to say what types of exercise are good. We get to say where people are exercising. And so it just allows us this finer level of detail that allows us to do much more data-driven policy analysis. And I think that's one of the reasons that economists are so excited about this is we can actually start digging in and give policymakers much more detail in terms of their decisions that they make.
Great. Anne?
Well, I'll start with a sort of a paraphrase of Spider-Man's kind of famous quote. And it's sort of with big data comes big responsibility. And I think that's, it's the challenge we're certainly facing with the data with the National Broadband Map. And I think a lot of the challenge with so much data here and is that, we're very excited about open data and very excited about doing this data-driven decision-making, but this challenge is getting through all of it in a responsible way and coming out with recommendations or analyses that really are able to take into account the full breadth, especially because every data set has its own unique piece of area that it can really work on. And so what you're looking at with the MLab set is very different than, say, the data we collected with the broadband map. And so very excited for people to be able to mash up so many different kinds of data, but figuring out how to do that, especially when you have data collected at so many different levels of granularity, so many different really sizes, creates a real challenge. And I think that's going to be one of our next big steps is really those discussions of how to really do those mashups in a way that we're continuing kind of the work forward. And I think as well, thinking not just from, we're really excited about the business opportunities that exist with people thinking about how to use the data. And some of the things that we found this year is we've got a number of states who are using the MLab data and other different metrics. And at first we thought they were just going to use it to look at speed tests. And what we're finding is they're using it as part of a verification tool. And they're also using it as an engagement tool to really try to engage community members to say, hey, we're talking about speeds. When I say 3 megs, you don't know what that means. So let's find out let's have you do a speed test and find out what kind of speeds are you getting, and then have you see what that's like and get a context for what that means. Because it's, when we're all in this room and we talk and we say 10 or 100 or 50 and we have a sense of what that means, but for so many people they don't. And so that's been really exciting to see these sort of, again, something's created and then it's a whole different use that we're finding. And so I'm really excited to just see this continuing evolution in open data.
Great. Vint, I don't know if you want to respond to it.
I've already consumed a lot of time, but some of your remarks made me think of a very famous book called Lies, Damn Lies, and Statistics. And the point made there, of course, is that you can, I mean, the comment appreciate is that you can take a set of statistics and present them in various ways to persuade people of one thing or another. But I actually wanted to suggest one other kind of rabble-rousing notion, that nothing happens unless somebody isn't contented with the current status quo. And so discontent is an important driver here. Now, I'm not suggesting everybody should go off and be discontented with everything, but I think that these kind of data will help drive, I hope, both public and legislative efforts to give more capacity and better quality of service to everyone, not just in the United States, but elsewhere. Because I believe that being online and having access to information like this and everything else that's on the net is really valuable, very important, and it's a way in which we can move forward. So I hope that there's a certain amount of discontent generated by the interpretation of these data that drives us into better quality.
Great. So I have a final question for the panelists, and then we're going to actually open it up for questions from all of you. And I want to give you a hypothetical. Let's say hypothetically you were able to sit down and talk with Vint Cerf and suggest things that might be useful for what's next with Measurement Lab. Do you have ideas, suggestions, thoughts on, where might it be useful for Measurement Lab to go in the future?
I'm taking notes.
We are sitting down and talking.
That's right, yes. It's not hypothetical.
IPv6 adoption.
Yay!
So,
it's been an orphan for a long time. It needs to be adopted.
So one of the things that we've been sort of playing with conceptually at FCC is this whole notion of weather maps, right? The idea that on any given day, one of the things that probably has the most beautiful presentation of data is either the weather page or the stock pages, because of the volume of metrics sort of shown. So the notion of this as real time, you eloquently show this great visualization as a video over time and how the bar charts move, which I think is fantastic. But the closer we get to that volume of data in real time, the more we're understanding how network traffic is changing today and how that change today might change what I do. And in particular, because we have, I think the number is on the order of 45 million smartphones in the US, the ability for me as a consumer to understand what's going on with my network traffic today and how it might affect some of the things I do becomes really, really valuable.
Good idea. Could I just respond? There is an internet weather map, or at least there was one. A man named John Quarterman used to make those. He's in Texas. I don't know if it was Austin or not, but for some years when the bulk of the internet backbone was operated by the U.S. government, this data was readily available. And when the National Science Foundation shut down the NSFNet in 1995, we actually removed from visibility a lot of the performance information that had been made available because everything had gone into a commercial setting. So here with the MLab and with some of the other sources, Akamai, for example,
I was just going to suggest it.
Servers scattered all around the world is making 225 million measurements every, whatever the measurement period is, that could also be introduced into the data if they were willing to share it. So I like the idea of the weather map thing. That would be cool.
Yeah. Yesterday we had a forum just across town where about 7 researchers who'd gotten early access to our map data came and gave some of their preliminary results, and all of them talked about the challenges with the data and also what they would like to see. And I think that they kind of echo what we see in this space are sort of areas where people want more information and would help, again, make the picture whole, and whether it's MLab or whether it's at another place. But, and everyone there said what was really interesting for them would really be understanding what people were subscribing to when they were talking about, people taking tests, so they could understand, if there's a delta, what that delta, might be, or if it's, if it's on the other side of that. And so I think that was something you heard a lot from folks, and it's a challenge because it requires, requires really a human entry, or it requires so many different tests at a given time, so you can sense what sort of the max is that someone's getting, but it's still an approximation. And I know that's something we've had a lot of ongoing discussions about, but it's certainly something that I think would add another dimension to the space.
If I could interject, I serve as the chairman of the Visiting Committee on Advanced Technology at NIST. And NIST, you may remember, used to be called the National Bureau of Standards. And it provided weights and measures to facilitate commerce and fairness in trade. It occurs to me that it'd be interesting to see whether we could find some standardized metrics that could be established so that anyone who is providing service on the internet could be rated according to those standardized metrics. Transparency to the consumer might consist of being able to express where that service is relative to these standardized metrics. But your comment earlier about, what should I do on the net today based on the Internet Weather Report? Trying to figure out what's not working properly is hard in this big complex system. I've always wanted a WTF button on my computer. And it's not working right. You poke the button and it says, well, New York is congested right now and you should be routing your traffic through Beijing or something.
The FCC might suggest a WTH button.
Thank you. That's probably a little better. Thank you very much. Point noted here.
Yes, and I would, of course, be remiss in not mentioning that one of the pieces that OTI has worked quite a bit on is a truth in broadband labeling, and put in quite a number of filings with the FCC on exactly this issue of creating sort of, I think it's been referred to as a nutrition label for your ISP, and it's It's mirrored after a lot of the things that we've seen with the Schumer boxes, those standard pieces of information that you get when you get a credit card. And it goes through and it lists, here's all the different rates and fees and et cetera, and it's just right there, very accessible, so you can compare and contrast across. In that case, it would be credit cards. In our case, it would be different internet service providers.
I think that was also a recommendation out of the National Broadband Plan, Sasha. There was a similar kind of recommendation as one of the goals in the plan.
That's correct.
Can I just add something else? One thing I would love to see integrated into this data set is real-world variables, demographic and economic variables. Because I think one of the things that policymakers are very interested in is not sifting through 300 terabytes of data themselves, but being able to do a simple correlation between broadband speeds and GDP, broadband speeds and population densities would be very interesting. Education level, educational attainment, and I think one way forward is to work with national statistical agencies to come up with a way to map these out.
Do you know that if this data could be mapped into precincts so that you knew what your constituents were getting in the way of service, that might be a very metric.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's, I mean, one of the things we found very quickly is that as much as we were so excited by how many options we offered in the National Broadband Map, and I sort of saw it as you were going through with such ease through all of the different, or as you were going through with such ease with all the,
she was going through it with much
you know, all of the different options, and we, you know, we do the same, and kind of, oh, it's right here, shoot, 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 and someone says, wait, go back, please, and I think you never underestimate that the sort of being able to have the tutorials and some of the easy reports that can come out, because the reality is that for a lot of, you know, I think for a lot of policymakers or for a lot of people whose main business isn't broadband, and trying to show them sort of why broadband is important to them, you've got to give them some things to hook them in early, because otherwise it just, you know, becomes a glaze sometimes.
Great. Yes, Michael.
Yeah, the other one that your comment about demographics made me think as well. The type of technology on which the end user is receiving or sending information is actually also kind of important too. There's a high correlation with speed throughput there. So, you know, how they're actually connecting ends up being of particular importance to the speed metric. And in particular, when you start looking at it context over large geographic areas like, you know, an individual country or that country that only has a certain kind of throughput, you end up going, oh, I understand why, and perhaps there is this policy directive which might add more value to their infrastructure. So I think we need to make sure that we're able to distinguish those kind of variables too.
You know, as long as you're thinking about other demographic elements, you mentioned economics. I don't know if it would be conceivable to get pricing information into the database, but having some sense for the cost of whatever the services that you're getting might be a really helpful measure to compare things.
It's not as difficult as you think. Here in the United States, you have prices that vary from state to state often, whereas in most OECD countries, you have one flat rate for the entire country. There's no geographically based pricing, so that would
That's
be
just
feasible.
crazy talk.
Well, the other thing is you do have IP addresses, which means that you can tie those back, in most cases, to an ISP, which gives you some indication of the technology that might be being used.
Well, users better be able to tie them back to an ISP, because that's what the regional internet registries are supposed to be doing.
We were at a workshop a couple weeks ago with a number of EU countries, and the University of Edinburgh right now is doing a project, and it is asking people, they are asking people for what price do they pay and what they subscribe to, and it's been, I think they're really just starting to be able to dive into their data. They have a pretty beta sort of visualization up, but it was interesting to hear from them and sort of the challenges they think they have or haven't had in, you know, getting accurate info from people about, you know, whether they really know what they pay and the taxes and all of that. So.
Right. And of course, if folks want to find out more, just realized we haven't actually said where you can find Measurement Lab. So you can go to measurementlab.net. And Josh, correct me if I get this wrong, but I believe you can run the new network diagnostic tool at measurementlab.net/run-NDT. So with that said, why don't we open this up to audience participation? Do we have JU right here in front?
We have roving microphones.
Yes.
My name is Bonnie Bracey, and I have been to 5 conferences for educators. They showed the map. No one knew how to demonstrate the regular broadband map, and I didn't see this. How do we integrate this into school policy information so that communities of learning have some sense of the data that you're talking about? This is so powerful.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll take a first stab, and I'm sure Ann will follow up. Just last week, in fact, the Department of Education launched their own site based on the U.S. Department of Ed's data around their facilities and their connectivity with a mashup with the data from the National Broadband Map. So again, speaking to Vint's core notion of having an infrastructure which allows openness for other people to use information, like we architected the National Broadband Map, allows for this other great business process of having Ed really come in and going, hey, there's an opportunity for us to use that great asset for our own policy objective, furthering educational advances through internet use. And I think much like how you architected this visualization gives that same opportunity. So we at the FCC could mash that into the technology infrastructure for the National Broadband Map in partnership with NTIA, or Ed could do the same thing there. So I think the value is that we have these massive open data sets, which means we can let anyone have access to it, but at the same time provide our own analytical function, which gives people that purview.
I'll just note one thing in our next data collection. One of the things we're going to be that the grantees will be reporting on is they'll be pairing up when they give information about, say, a school location, the unique ID for that school that's used by Ed for a lot of other data. So that should allow an easier mashup of the data, and I think we'd also be happy to have you talk to you offline about we'd be happy to do a webinar with some of the folks to show, kind of go through some of the different utility in the map.
Great. Other questions? Yes, right here.
Thank you. Lynn Stanton, TR Daily. Since the people taking the test are volunteers, they're self-selected, is there anything in the data to help researchers see how they might differ from the general population? And can you tell, at least from self-reporting, what kind of service they are signed up for or think they're signed up for?
Sure. Sampling bias. I can take that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So there is, of course, always with any sort of self-report methodology, the problem of sample bias. And we're very cognizant of this problem. There is also, one way to help alleviate that is to end up with a population of users, a sample that grows so large it starts mirroring the population. We haven't done a random sampling within Measurement Lab to see if there's a discrepancy between those two, but we do know, for example, Sam Knows, which is doing a random sampling, is using Measurement Lab as the back end for a lot of their testing. And so we'll be able to actually look and see across these things if there is a differential and then correct for anything of that sort. And you had, can you use a microphone? And introduce yourself, since you definitely deserve kudos.
Just to complete the answer. Right now, the population is not just self-selected. For example, a huge percentage, huge portion of the population is actually comes from a mu-torrent client. So I'm sorry. So basically, that's not self-selected as in a population of people going to a website and starting a test. And that's really a huge percentage of the data we are collecting right now. It's a specific BitTorrent client. They embed our tool in their client to auto-tune the tool and to better match their broadband performance.
So when people start the BitTorrent client, the test automatically runs, and because the tools are open source, it's possible for third parties to make use of them in this way. And so anyone running the uTorrent client will have the NDT test as a diagnostic engine that helps the uTorrent client tune to your bandwidth.
Right.
And that's one case in which it's not self-selected. And if other people did that, we would have a larger population of users also not self-selected.
That's right. In the back here.
Hi, I'm Joseph Miller from the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies.
Can't hear this question.
Sure, I'm
And
Joseph
I
Miller.
can't see you either. No. So let me explain.
I can come up and stand in the light. No, that's fine. Is that better? Okay, great. I'm Joseph Miller from the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. I'd be interested to see, one of the things we're concerned about is the extent to which relevance plays a role in broadband adoption. And we've heard that used as a way to explain away the business case for building out broadband to some areas, that if it's not relevant, then they'll never perceive it as being relevant. So I'm kind of interested in how this data can be tied into the presentation from the other day with Mike Chorost around the mind and the intersection of the mind and innovation and the internet, and how some of this data can be overlaid with some of the more circumstantial issues affecting mindsets in these communities.
So my first reaction to this really intriguing question is can we show where we don't have data? And in a sense, we have some of that embedded in the database where we have small numbers of samples. We know that we didn't get very many people engaging in running these measurements. Now that might mean because there's nobody there who has any broadband access, or it might be because they weren't interested. It occurs to me that the only way we really would get that resolved would be to literally mount a kind of campaign to try to get people to want to participate, to want to produce the data because it's beneficial to them. You'll remember that the run-up to the census involved a lot of explanation about why it was important to be part of the census, because there were side effects, governmental grants and allocations and voting structure and everything else. It's conceivable that this is so important to America's future that we should be engaging in something along those lines to explain to people why they need to participate in the generation of this information. And since it's something that can be done repeatedly, it's something that can be done over time, and to help get feedback as to how well are we doing in terms of pursuing broadband everywhere. So getting this mechanism in place in a way that causes people to want to do this could be very helpful. Another alternative is to try to persuade the ISPs that they need to be doing the same thing, if only to understand how well their services are working. That might be a harder sell.
Speed matters.
Yes. As a matter, yes.
Very good. Yes.
Hi, I'm Mark DeFalco with the Appalachian Regional Commission, and it's great to have all the data available. And what I'm interested in also is the interpretation of the data, and making sure you gave the example of Dallas, and most people would think that Dallas is probably a big city and it's going to be very, very well wired. So when you see congestion in Dallas, is that an indication that there's a disproportionate number of users, therefore they're slowing down the network? Is it that the backbone facilities are not there to handle all the network? Is it that the primary providers, the phone and cable companies, did not put in good last mile facilities? What's causing the slowdown? So it's the interpretation, especially as you start getting into non-technical users of the data who are looking to just at what's there, and they could very quickly, I think, draw the wrong conclusions.
Understood. Well, in this case, we tried, although this is a fairly sophisticated presentation of ratios, we were trying to show whether the likelihood was that the network capacity was not what it should be, or whether the user's access to it was too slow. And depending on where you fall in that ratio, you come to one conclusion or another. The network itself is inadequate, or the users don't have fast enough access to it. But your point is extremely well taken. That's why we want this to be accessible to researchers who can help not only analyze but raise issues and questions about that data, and maybe stimulate further collection and better analysis.
And I have one more quick one, and this is really for all the panelists, I think. What's your impressions on the consequences of what appears to be a migration toward usage-based pricing for the internet?
I'd like to react to that by pointing out that the primary scarcity here tends to be bits per second bandwidth. It's not how many bytes you transfer, it's how quickly you do it. So to be crude about it, if you were to send a terabyte of data over a month, continuously, 24 hours a day, you would not be consuming very much capacity in terms of bandwidth. On the other hand, if you did it in 3 or 4 minutes, a terabyte in 3 or 4 minutes consumes a great deal of bits per second. And the thing which is limiting here is the bits per second, not the total number of bytes that are sent. A lot of the schemes that I'm familiar with have a tendency to put limits on the number of bytes that are sent. And I don't think that's an accurate reflection of the demand that you're placing on the underlying infrastructure. It's really the bit rate that is the issue. So imagine being able to acquire access to the net up to a certain speed. You pay for the privilege of being able to run up to that speed. That would be a more accurate reflection of what you're consuming. When the network does become congested, and it can easily happen if everyone wants to do everything all at the same time, they want to run streaming video or whatever, it may be the case that the network will not be able to carry that much load. At that point, you ought to be able to get access to the available capacity pro rata with regard to what band of bandwidth or tier of bandwidth you had paid for. Those are tactics that I think are more fair to the consumers, but that doesn't seem to be the way in which the metric is being posed, and I'm concerned about that.
I just jump in and say that across the 34 OECD countries, data caps, as we call them, are fairly common. We see them. They were big for a little while. They've kind of whittled away in certain countries, and so it's not surprising to see them showing up in the U.S. I think you see them almost everywhere on wireless data plans. So I know very few countries that have unlimited wireless data. So you'd expect to see them on wireless, on wired data plans. At least the caps that you are facing here in the United States are relatively high. So you've got some countries where you have a 2 gigabyte up to 10 gigabyte cap per month, whereas some of the caps we're talking about here in the U.S. are 250 to 300 gigabytes of traffic per month. So something to consider.
I would add one thing that illustrations like today and the launch of the National Broadband Map add value to the discussion by making data open. And in previous incarnations, those data were remarkably closed and didn't allow consumers enough choice to really understand what was going on in the landscape. So I think today's event applauds the kind of opportunity for both policymakers and consumers to make better choice that help drive that to the right solution.
I will simply add that I've actually not yet seen anywhere an actual usage-based pricing scheme. What I've seen is you get charged X amount, even if you use this much, even if you use a tiny fraction of that, and then you get charged for more. But you never get a refund if you use very little or less, right? It's not actually usage-based pricing. And I think that's really important in this debate. I think it would be very interesting to see usage-based pricing.
So I want to dispute this with you, and let me say why. I believe that people do not know, nor can they know, how many bytes they're going to have to go, how many bytes they will consume, or what bit rate they will consume when they turn on a particular application. The dynamic range of demand on the internet is enormous. It's not like a phone call, which is 64 kilobits a second, nailed up point to point. The faster you talk, you don't use up more bits. But in the internet applications, that's what happens. So the reason I am not a fan of usage-based pricing is that it causes people to avoid using applications because they're not sure what it's going to cost. They're not looking forward to a big bill at the end of the month. That's why fixed pricing has been so powerful as a way of giving people the freedom and flexibility to try things out without being worried about that. I accept the idea that bandwidth limitations I want to say this again, bandwidth caps, not total number of byte caps, but bandwidth caps are more reasonable because it doesn't stop you. What it does, it says that we won't charge you any more than X, but we will throttle you if you get past that data rate, or if you try to get past that data rate. That is a much more fair tactic, in my view, from the consumer point of view. So you and I should duke this out sometime.
If I can give an experience from Australia and New Zealand, one of the things that we see happening in countries that have had long periods of data caps is that there are some operators who decide to let you have unlimited data, but if you go over your quota and you use 200 gigabytes worth of data a month, what they'll do is they reserve the right to shape your traffic and slow down your speeds during congested periods. So it's not that you're being blocked off, like used to be the case. It's that they slow you down to slower rates during congested times, but then when there's no congestion, they open you back up. So that is definitely one approach.
Closer to where I would want to go, although if what they're saying is that they'll dial you down to 19 kilobits a second when you were running at 10 gigs before, I'm not happy with that outcome. I do accept a pro rata arrangement, however.
Right. And coming back to Vint's point, for anyone that looks at traffic, it's almost a beautiful sinusoidal curve. So it's interesting in that I hear people talk about, oh my God, Netflix is going to, take over the internet. Last year it seemed like it was BitTorrent. The year before that was spam. The year before, there's always something that's the big application, right? There's always one that's the largest. And what's weird about this is that if you downloaded your movie at night, there wouldn't be any problem. But we've created applications like Netflix that stream live during peak usage hours. It's incredibly inefficient. But the problem is actually not the capacity on the networks. It's the operationalization of these applications. And I haven't heard anyone really talking about it.
I'm a big fan of download playback. If we had a gigabit per second, which some other people in the world have for very moderate fees, you could download an hour's worth of video in 10 to 15 seconds. And so this notion of video on demand changes its character dramatically when you're operating at those speeds, because you just download the stuff, play it whenever you want to, and you don't have to stress the network. You're off the net, basically, very, very quickly. So when you get into a really high-speed regime, it changes the way in which it's possible to do this. And if somebody says, well, where are you going to put all the terabytes of that stuff you downloaded, the answer is you can buy probably 2 or 3 terabytes worth of disk drive for about $250. I did the math in 1979 for what it would cost to do a terabyte. It was $100 million. I didn't have $100 million in 1979, and I still don't. But anyway, the point is that storage is cheap.
Well, I think we see the same mindset today when we look at, people, when you used to think about, am I going to listen to the radio, or am I going to download a song? And if people were downloading a song and it takes them, whenever something takes someone a long time, you lose interest because we sort of, we want it now, we want it fast. And I think, it's the same, you see models that work because it downloads very quickly. It's a couple seconds and it's there, and you say, yay, I have it, now it's mine. And, and but it's because it's, it's obviously such a smaller file. And it'd be interesting to see some of that, kind of how consumer behavior changes in places where, where you already have, where you have people using faster speeds, and what what the behavior is doing, and what kind of things they're really using it for.
I think Vint makes an excellent point here about the need for high-speed data networks. Because of their bursty nature, you can have a gigabyte download if it's only going to take you 10, 15 seconds. That happens at one moment, and then you don't clog the network for the next 2 hours while you're watching the film. Whereas when you're on these slower networks and you're trying to stream or you're trying to download, you have a lot of people trying to download over a long period of time, and that's where we run into network problems. So I think that also makes the case for higher speed networks.
It makes another case, too, if I could suggest something. I have always wanted to get the satellite people excited about raining IP packets down on 100 million receivers. Because broadcast as a technology is a very efficient way of delivering the same thing to a large number of destinations. We haven't ever built a serious broadcast IP system. And there's nothing stopping, technologically, it's straightforward to do that. So the idea that many, many people wanted to see a particular movie, you just broadcast the thing, and they can download from there and then play it back whenever they want to.
Michael?
I do think we need to be slightly careful about thinking about that as the only demand portion of the curve. In particular, let's take, for instance, the healthcare demand aspect of the curve, which really does require a significant on-demand, high-bandwidth traffic for things like remote surgery, telemedicine applications for X-ray transfer, records, document keeping transfer.
Are you serious about remote surgery?
Yes.
This is pretty scary. I mean, any network glitch, oops.
There are applications that are going on with it today, and increasingly in ophthalmology and communities that lack the ability to see an ophthalmologist for high incidence of diabetes. So these are cases which are significantly require high bandwidth on demand, and I think for us to think about the demand aspect as only I want to watch a film
that's fair.
Is the case I'm trying to make. So I mean, we need to think of this market as being a very broad market, and that there are significant business applications in addition to consumer applications that really require the breadth of different pricing.
So actually, there are new router technologies coming along that would be capable of doing some of what you're saying. One is called OpenFlow, coming out of Stanford University. We ought to have an offline discussion about remote surgery. I have no problem with an observer giving advice to somebody who's actually performing the surgery.
You didn't want the screen to have the scalpel?
You know about the Da Vinci robotic operating system?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of these days you'll. Okay.
But I think that brings us back to the data we see here, and the data and what's available in the National Broadband Map and other data that's coming out, and understanding who the users are who are taking these tests, and understanding are these users at home, are these small businesses, are these anchor institutions, and that was some data we started collecting through the map, and has actually turned out to be some of the most challenging in the data set, because it requires, again, that it requires the human interaction of the person talking to the person who's running the library's network or the school's network, and understanding what are they really subscribing to right now. And that's but that's, as we look at needs, what's needed and what's available, and understanding the institutional capacity needs is really important.
Yeah. An interesting anecdote. We were, speaking of remote surgery, we were OTI staff were on a retreat, and the location was pretty remote, and we were serviced via satellite broadband. And of course, we're out there, and we're a bunch of geeks, and so we're like trying to figure out what WTH is going on. And so we run, all these diagnostic tools, and we find out like our latency is about 20,000 milliseconds. And it gets me thinking, like, imagine like being in surgery, and it's like, like, grab the paddles. And then you're like 20 seconds later, you get an answer. Like, but all right, let's open it up for another question in the back there.
Thanks for making the trek up front. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I'm Rajendra Singh from World Bank. Ofcom had come out with a report about 2 weeks back. I don't know whether you have seen it. They did very extensive measurements, and the conclusion, I have not read the whole report, but the conclusion is that in terms of bits per second, what ISPs are advertising and what consumers are getting, it's almost less than 1/3. My question is whether any other regulator, FCC or others in OECD countries, have they done the similar kind of measurement? Or if you have seen the report, what is your perception? Is it everything from the consumer's point of view, or there are certain things which Ofcom should have focused on?
So I haven't seen this report, so have you?
Yeah. This is an area where a lot of regulators have been very interested, but the regulators have been haven't been able to do anything so far because it is extremely difficult to measure actual speeds compared with advertised speeds. There have been a couple of groups like Epitero and Sam Knows who've been doing this for the UK. And what they've done is, there's two ways to run these tests. There's one where it's a software client on the machine, which some of them have done, and some of them actually install, for example, a DSL connection. So they'll buy a DSL connection and test it, 1,000 times a day. It's been very difficult to do that within countries, and it's very difficult to do it across countries. And that's one of the problems with the statistics that we have, is these are reported speeds. These are theoretical limits on the DSL lines that we're seeing advertised. But I think some ISPs are starting to move away from that, and I think that's one of the nice things about this data, and what this data will show is that we can actually get an idea what actual speeds are. And when you look at the headline speeds, they're much, much higher than what people are actually getting.
Yeah. This is an interesting comparison. Some people used to sell computers based on the clock speed of the computer until it turned out you couldn't get the clock speed to go up anymore, because if you did, it would melt the chips because there was too much power going in. So they stopped doing that. I think when it stops becoming persuasive to assert that you could go at this maximum bandwidth in theory, because of data like this, we may see changes in the advertising practices too, which would be more accurate.
If I can jump in with one thing, one of the nice things about the UK, though, that I've seen is operators actually advertise their contention ratios. So with you have an operator who says,
do you want to explain contention ratio very briefly?
This is how much they've oversold the line.
Right.
So essentially, they say you can buy a 16 megabit per second connection where the bandwidth is shared with 50 other people, and it costs you a certain amount, or that's shared with 25 other people. So it means there's fewer people using the backhaul coming into the DSLAM. And so this is quite interesting in terms of transparency, because people, for example, in the Czech Republic are allowed to actually choose their plan. They take a 16 megabit with a 50 to 1 or a 16 with a 20 to 1.
So I really think this is wonderful, because that's getting exactly to the scarce resource, which is bits per second shared with other people.
Except that could backfire, because you could get on the lower ratio, but you're going to have the high users all trying to get on that low ratio, and you're going to end up getting slower rates than if you had gone with the higher ratio.
Well, yes, I think typically the people opting for the 20 to 1 instead of the 50 to 1 are typically small businesses. So you'd have a certain type of usage pattern during the day, and it would probably be open at night, which would correspond well to residential users as well, for using later into the night. But
and I don't know, I believe there is some collection of actual data, and that you guys have done some work on that in the National Broadband Map.
So in the National Broadband Map, our original technical request included what we called typical data. And this has been, as you said, it's been very challenging. We had a specific definition that we used for typical data. In this case, the definition we used was the typical speed someone could expect to experience during periods of high network usage. There are two real constraints on what we could even theoretically get back from that. And one is that we currently, with the National Broadband Map, are collecting speed in tiers. So 3 to 6, 6 to 10, 10 to 25. And these do pretty correspond very closely with what people are advertising today. But clearly you could have a case where someone's max advertised speed that they provided us with was in the 10 to 25 range, and so would the typical speed. And you wouldn't know if the typical speed was, in fact, 20, if the max advertised was 25 and the typical was 25 or 24 or 23 or 20, or 15, you wouldn't know that. And so that certainly is there. And there was also, I think, the National Broadband Map data is all voluntary, and so there were a number of folks who weren't interested in providing that. There was also some different interpretations from the provider side of what that meant, and so I would it's a good note to caution folks. We do have the data available, because we've made all of the non-confidential data available for people to use. But we do make that caveat that it's really not a complete data set, and so we would very much caution any kind of conclusions that came out of that.
Right. Great. So,
can
yes.
I share one quick example? I live in Paris, and I actually live on the outskirts of Paris. So, my coworkers who actually live within the city have access to these 100 megabit per second connections over fiber. And I live out in the outskirts, kind of border countryside, 24 kilometers outside of Paris. And I had terrible, terrible broadband until just recently. And the reason for this was I would subscribe to a 30 megabit per, or a 28 megabit per second plan that was advertised as 28 megabits. But I lived roughly 4.5 kilometers from the exchange for DSL. So what that means is my actual throughput was down at about 1 megabit per second, but I was paying the same price as everyone else for 28 megabits per second. My village actually got together and we spent 50,000 euros and we paid France Telecom to install a small exchange in our village. And all of a sudden I jumped up, my throughput went from 1 to 20 megabits per second of actual throughput. Now that's very difficult for policymakers to kind of judge what is the line length. But one of the interesting things in France is when you sign up for broadband, they run a line test and they tell you the distance from the exchange. So that's public distance from the exchange. They give you your attenuation. So they give you all these characteristics of the line, and then they can tell you, here's what we think your actual speed is going to be. Wow. And I was surprised to hear that ISPs in other countries don't do this very often because really you can map this out. I mean, you can see how DSL attenuates over distance, and that's something that could be plotted in, I think, relatively easily. I'd have to ask the ISPs how difficult it would be to get this type of information, but...
Well, physics works differently in the United States, so...
Actually, this gets back to the more generic question about standard weights and measures and the possibility that offering a service of this kind, which is becoming almost a kind of commodity service, ought to have standardized metrics associated with it. You just illustrated a good reason for that.
Right. So we are at time, and we're going to stop this portion, at least, of the event, but folks will be up here and around for at least the next few minutes. You should feel free to come up with any pressing questions that you have for the panelists. In the interim, I do want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of you to taking time off to be here today. Fantastic panel.